Welcome to the Funnel Reboot podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Don't you wonder how we came to have everything that's here in today's world? To see how things came to be? For us to do that, we've got to imagine what the world used to be like. A TV show that did a great job of this, in a funny way, was Sesame Street. Yeah, that Sesame Street, in the Cave People sketches. Here's a clip from one.
Once upon a time, some cave people lived in a cave, long ago, before anything had been invented. And the cave people had a king.
Hi there, I'm the king.
And the king loved to get letters.
Oh boy, do I love to get letters. Hey, where's the royal mailman with today's letters?
In those days, letters were written on rocks.
Oh, wow, these letters are so heavy.
Ouch! Oh, you put the letters on my fingers.
Uh-oh.
That does it. Writing letters on rocks has got to stop. Send for the royal smart person.
It is I, the royal smart person. You called?
Yeah, listen, I'm tired of getting letters that are written on rocks. We need something better to write letters on.
So the royal smart person went to his laboratory. Egad, I have it. My latest invention.
Oh, yeah?
I call it paper.
Ooh, let me see that. Why, this paper stuff of yours is great.
Obviously, that's not how things were invented. To get to how things were really invented, there's one person we gotta know. Someone who devoted his life to this type of history. American Daniel Boorstin, a history professor and chief librarian of the Library of Congress. He came out in 1983 with The Discoverers, a book that explains how we learned to tell time, sail around the globe, cure diseases, build megastructures, split the atom. Hey, Glenn here. It's the middle of summer when I'm recording this, and it's a time to don a pair of shades, a beach towel, grab a good book. And Funnel Reboot usually shares talks with marketing book authors, but for this show, I'm going to share some reads that go a little farther afield. Please come along with me through Boorstin and 5 other books that are all amazing. The subjects range between business and humanities, technology, even science fiction, and each is broken into its own section. So you can use the player you're listening on to jump straight to the section that interests you. So with that, let's check out The Discoverers and find out how they got us here. Boorstin starts by going back to the ancient Greeks and the great appetite they had for learning. They broke that down into reading, writing, arithmetic, music, and philosophy. They also had beliefs which we'd consider irrational. Take their use of the Olympian gods and mythical heroes to explain phenomena like lightning and the sun's transit of the sky. Boorstin says that they did this to, quote, make the universe seem intelligible, beautiful, and rational. The characters cast in the leading roles of upholders of the world. So that's fine that they had those gods, but that was an oversimplification of the universe. The Greeks, for example, took their view of what the world liked from the poet Homer, who wrote in the 12th century BCE that the entire world was limited to lands bordering the Mediterranean, and beyond it lay a flat ocean that went out to the edge of the earth. Any mariner who knew that, upon sailing to Gibraltar at the mouth of the Mediterranean, they were probably not keen to go further just to see what was out there. So that held the Greeks back. Then in the 2nd century, the astronomer Ptolemy used, quote, all available facts to confirm the spherical character of the Earth, and then the latitude-longitude grid on which to hang increasing knowledge. He suggested the vastness of lands still unknown and still to be discovered, and so opened minds for knowledge, unquote. And armed with this, future explorers decided to venture farther, past Gibraltar, to the south, and around the tip of Africa, to the Middle East, the Far East, and eventually to the New World. Based on the example of the Greeks and Romans, teaching in our current era, or AD if you prefer, those early centuries used 7 liberal arts. The first 3, the trivium, were grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The last 4, the quadrivium, were arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. In the late Roman times, and through the Middle Ages even, these categories served as a container for the entirety of human knowledge. Boorstin explains that while Greek and Roman thinkers left us writings full of great thinking, people started to revere the writings to the point that it slowed our desire to challenge the ideas in them. Without that, we couldn't progress to even better ones. Kind of sucked if you were a Nicholas Copernicus or Galileo Galilei, who would see through a telescope that the sun doesn't go around the earth. It would also suck if you wanted to understand the inner workings of the human body, as the only way back then, since it wasn't sanctioned as part of these 7 arts, you'd have to go robbing bodies for graves and using barber's shears to open them, doing this in secret. But on the horizon was coming a better, faster way for pioneering thinkers to come out into the open and share their knowledge. In the 15th century, Gutenberg and other printing press owners began publishing books. At first, the only books they printed were scripture and ancient tomes. They did not dare to put out the writings of living authors. Why were they so stuck in the past? Well, for 1,500 years, people had relied on the world of the ancients. Before you could learn new knowledge, you have to kill the old classical knowledge that stands in the way. He said some intellectuals thought that they had become keepers of the text instead of teaching ideas that transcend the text. Their students would obsess over what their master had said instead of what the ideas meant. And academia came to resemble the theologian's wrinkles over the meaning of words in Scripture. And institutions in the Middle Ages had become so full of brain rot, slowing intellectual progress to such a slow crawl, it reached an impasse. If you could boil those oppressive conditions and make a movie scene out of it, it would probably sound like 1992's Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino and Chris O'Donnell. Pacino, playing Colonel Frank Slade, is a retired U.S. Army officer who was blinded by a grenade. Bitter about losing his sight, he pays Charlie O'Donnell, a young man from a working-class family, to be his personal attendant over Thanksgiving. Charlie, a natural leader, attends an exclusive private school on a scholarship, but lands in trouble when his classmates pull a prank on the headmaster, and he refuses to rat on them. Frank comes along to watch the school hearing about this, and when the faculty threaten to expel Charlie, his drive to fight for what's right takes over.
I don't know who went to this place. William Howard Taft, William Jennings Bryan, William Tell, whoever. Their spirit is dead, if they ever had one. It's gone. You're building a rat ship here, because I say you are killing the very spirit this institution proclaims it instills.
Sir, you're out of order.
Out of order? I show you out of order. You don't know what out of order is, Mr. Trask. I'd show you, but I'm too old. I'm too tired. If I were the man I was 5 years ago, I'd take a flamethrower to this place.
You might guess, according to my analogy, what would play the part of the flamethrower here. If you guessed, in historical terms, I meant the Renaissance, you'd have been right. The 17th and 18th centuries were a blossoming time when people yearned to know things that were previously thought to be unknowable. A French noble known as Count of Buffon, his real name was Georges-Louis Leclerc, went into these fields fearlessly. He simply asserted that all observations must have natural explanations, and if one wasn't known, he came up with his own guess about a root cause. Quote, "In order to judge what has happened," he said, "or even what will happen, one need only examine what is happening. Those are our causes and our reasons, unquote. We know this concept today as the scientific method. Its usefulness extends straight to the work of Watt, Darwin, Einstein, and others down to the present. Individuals like Comte did eventually start cycling their writings back and forth, and that led to them being published by scholarly societies and universities. We can thank these academic papers for giving us Newton's Principia Mathematica, and then they'd be translated, and those would travel by land and sea, and the knowledge would stretch to contemporaries all over the world. This is one of the reasons that we have learning growth, and these traveled on vehicles that were ever faster, the latest one being the internet. So that's the discoverers. Now, reading-wise, it's a bit more dense than a Wikipedia article, but it moves along more lightly and briskly than an academic work. Having said that, you need to set aside time to go through this massive 750-page book. Each chapter is sized right for reading in one sitting. Most of them give the context of the world before the hero of the story comes along. Then it follows their life as they make their discovery, showing how it shaped things and gave us a bit more of the world that we have today. Now, we might marvel at everything that we have around us today and thinking that those in olden days were dumber than us, but I came away feeling the opposite. An anthropologist quoted by Boorstin, Edward Tyler, said, quote, "There seems to be no human thought so primitive as to have lost its bearing on our own thought," unquote. We should acknowledge that we have the same brains that they did, and many of them used their brains so that we could live off the fruit of their labors. Let's turn to business and the book Blindsight, The Mostly Hidden Ways Marketing Reshapes Our Brains by Matt Johnson and Prince Guman. Came out in 2020. Now, authors Matt and Prince have backgrounds in neuroscience and marketing, respectively. So, unsurprisingly, this book starts reading much like a first-year psych course textbook. They explain we don't experience the world directly, but what we actually experience is the brain's model of the world. Raw sensory data filtered through our understanding and beliefs, and this creates an internal reality. They explain that memory, too, is unreliable. It's not so much a photograph than a constantly edited facsimile. We're not listening to the original song so much as a mixtape of it. And when we're making decisions, the brain is relying less on logic than on nudges that it believes will ensure our survival. I didn't take first-year psych, so I was fascinated by a lot of these things in the opening chapters. And that lays the groundwork for the main argument in the book, that our brains are susceptible to being manipulated. Some point to this to justify aiming messages subliminally. You know, those stories we heard of theaters supposedly inserting still images of popcorn and soda for a fraction of a second during a movie to raise concession sales. Tactics like these so scared the U.S. Federal Communications Commission that in 1974 they banned any such practices. The authors debunked the idea that any of this worked. They don't have any actual influence on our subliminal mind. But what they do admit is that we can manipulate ourselves. That's because our brain likes to go on automatic. It conserves mental energy that way. Marketers can nudge us out of that to using manual mental effort when we give something our attention. Marketing must shift our brain into that manual gear through the presence or absence of something that makes us think more. Otherwise, our behavior will never be influenced to take action. The prize for winning this battle is that their brand is remembered when we as a consumer must make a buying decision. For memories to be ingrained in us, they must be associated with something we already know, though. And that's not subliminal. It's more like midliminal. And it's why we should pay attention to the ways that marketers place ads. It's that association that the consumer will take away. The book gives an in-depth look at how social media plays with our biases, pulls down our defenses. One of our shortcomings is how much pleasure we feel anticipating something. Implicit in the platform's use of infinite scrolls is that we don't know what the next post contains, but we know that there is a next post. Not only are we okay with the fact that it's unknown, we love making a gamble that it's going to be a pleasant surprise instead of a waste of time. Studies show that the gratification we get from that next post is smaller than how happy we are while scrolling in suspense, waiting for it to pop up. And that we feel even more unhappy when we close an app than when we scroll and have an experience that's terrible. Now, as an aside, this is like a great book that explains the same phenomenon, and it's Dan Gilbert's Stumbling on Happiness, which points out how unreliable humans are at predicting what brings us pleasure. Back to Johnson and Gutman. They explain that these aspects of social make its advert targeting very powerful. Even though we realize when on Facebook or TikTok that our engagement with posts is training the algorithm, we can't not improve its targeting because scrolling through posts has become so frictionless. We simply can't turn ourselves off while in front of such slick optimization. In sum, marketers must be cognizant of this weird behavior because our ads are dropped into this dynamic petri dish. You might think this means that we're hopelessly caught in social media's temptation. Not true, because one thing our brains are good at is sensing communication that empathizes with us. When a post is disingenuous, we can smell it from a mile away. We lean in when someone communicates a story. If it's a story that has something we identify with, we get almost instant understanding. It's an accelerant that sparks those associations in our head. And though marketers won't like hearing this, empathy rarely scales. We prefer stories that are shared personally, one at a time. Those shared over digital and impersonal media rarely work as well. Neuroscience supports that we're going to have salespeople around after all. A final point made by the book is how visceral the battle between brands is. When brands create associations, they are actually creating an enduring change in your brain's semantic network, they say. Brand associations are not ephemeral, untouchable concepts. They literally take up biological space inside your brain, living as connections between neurons in your temporal lobe. And they have the ability to heavily influence, if not actually construct, our experience of reality. Brands use the term mindshare in a figurative sense to say where one stands in comparison to another. But the biggest brands know that mindshare is quite literal. A brand can dominate competitors right down to Coke owning more of our brain's anatomy than Pepsi. The technology book that I thought was really cool was How Big Things Get Done. It came out in 2023 by Ben Flupierre and Dan Gardner. This book had been recommended by a friend of mine, and the co-author of the book, Dan Gardner, lives locally here. The book strikes a chord with something deep in humanity that always wants to team together with people and make big things. But many of our past initiatives to do this often go awry. Take the example of the Sydney Opera House, which took a decade longer than planned to open, and its original architect was fired due to chaotic construction conditions. Another contemporary example is California's high-speed rail project, whose costs escalated from an estimated $34 billion to over $100 billion and counting. Though they planned to make a 520-mile route, they've only been able to scale it to 119 miles so far. I'll add one that isn't in the book, the Tower of Babel, recounted in the book of Genesis. It's famous for tempering our grand plans, proving that we have breakdowns in understanding, and those can inevitably cause literal breakdowns in the things that we try to build. In light of all this, the book asks the question, what's the difference between projects that succeed and those that fail? The first clue they give to the answer is known as commitment fallacy. The authors say it's common for those who envision and bankroll a project to belittle the planning and to want to rush to get shovels in the ground. What this breeds is the notion that whatever the initial design was is set in stone. It's baked. And this causes people to lock in that design prematurely, as though they have no alternative but to continue with the project. They feel hell-bent to deliver that original scope, even when, as you get into implementing, the cost and the risk rise higher than you would otherwise tolerate. They urge to spend as much time as possible in the design phase. Don't be married to initial models. Take as many opportunities as you want to pivot and change course. Another crucial concept that they talk about comes from Daniel Kahneman. In his Thinking Fast and Slow book, he talked about what is all there is. WYSIATI. This describes a natural human decision-making process where we intuitively assume the information that we've seen is all that's available or all that's needed to make a decision. Kahneman calls this intuition the fault of our brain, which is a machine for jumping to conclusions. In daily life, this can lead to misjudging things. So, even as you get into implementation phase, step back, get clear-headed on what's going on. Ask if there's something you're missing. What is clearly not all there is? They also urge us to take advantage of what they call scale-free scalability. In any project, you're going to find aspects that fundamentally remain the same regardless of their size, from 1 up to infinity. The mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot termed this attribute a fractal, and we've seen those beautiful fractal designs where when you go into it, you see a miniature version of the macro, and it keeps repeating and repeating. When you identify aspects of a project that possess this scale-free trait, the authors advise putting maximum effort into it, because you're going to be assured of continuous dividends without ever encountering diminished returns. If you're building a skyscraper and you have the same design from floor to floor, try to make as many floors as possible. When you have AI agents who can replicate themselves, make as many of those as possible. Or if you are in a place where there's sun all year round, leverage that fact to cover your whole building with solar panels. That's scale-free scalability. So the principles in the book are really good for us to think about how we can turn what might have been a failure into an incredibly successful project. They can apply to marketing projects too. Any initiative actually, help it get completed on time and within budget. The authors point out to projects that achieve success like Heathrow Terminal 2 and the Empire State Building, which were both built well under budget and on time. They are held out for their reputation as being things that have stellar reputations for big things that were well done. I had a humanities book recommended to me by a friend who's a keen political observer. It's called Private Truths, Public Lies by Timur Kuran, 1995. He's someone who moved to the U.S. in the 1970s after experiencing severe turbulent years as an academic in Turkey. This book explores preference falsification. This is where each of us masks our true beliefs in public due to pressures like concern over how it impacts our reputation. And its implications can extend to whole societies. It explains political behavior, like where an election candidate who in public polls is favored to win, finds out when everyone's secret ballot is cast that almost nobody voted for them. You see it in unpredictable shifts like the Berlin Wall and Brexit. And there's a number of places where these discrepancies between your stated preferences and your actual behavior come out in marketing. Tipping points for this would be in areas like cigarettes, where everybody who you ask in a market research study will say that it's a terrible habit, but yet they will smoke. or those corporate motivational posters that the company says are an amazing way to inspire people by putting them up in the office, but everybody in the office hates them. Or people who say they want to have a healthy diet and exercise, but instead decide that they will eat fatty foods and get prescriptions for Ozempic. Quran mostly focuses on political behavior, where the choice between voicing your preference and remaining silent is a real tug of war between your inner and outer peace. It eventually will get triggered in some form, could even be a revolution. He examines how these private beliefs will bubble up in the form of revolt. People's murmurings will be spread even in the most repressive states, and even over generations if that's how long it takes until they come out. And leaders at the top of these totalitarian regimes can't keep them from emerging, and they also rarely see them coming. But there are chilling ways that the knife can cut the other way. When falsehoods are spread on public airwaves, that causes a lot of dissonance. It can either be of the subversive type, like social media influencers who are giving credence to very radical public or private opinions. That can destabilize the public. Or it can be the state-sponsored type, suppressing by saying that only what they say is true. This makes the public disconnected. It can potentially cause quiet quitting, where people would rather be willfully ignorant of what's happening than follow developments closely. This is what the Washington Post motto warns against when it says that democracy dies in the dark. There's a science fiction bestseller that was written in the last decade that I've read called Seveneves by Neil Stephenson. This novel opens with the line, quote, "The moon blew up without warning and for no apparent reason," unquote. The moon's destruction would actually be catastrophic, and in the book it causes almost instant panic on Earth as word spreads that all that debris will descend on the Earth within about 2 years. When it hits, it will extinguish all advanced life. The spacefaring nations had a frenetic plan to turn the International Space Station into an ark. It should potentially hold enough humans so that one day the Earth can be repopulated. As subsequent chapters show, space is an utterly perilous environment for humans, and those on the station face hostilities both from within and without. The characters show incredible ingenuity in staving off challenges. At the same time, their numbers dwindle with each emergency until it's actually unclear if the human race will manage to survive at all. I like how the humans are described in this book. At the start, where our population numbers in the billions, we're chiefly talking about how nations and intergovernmental bodies behave. But as we shrink down to thousands and then hundreds, it's the single personalities that frame what's going on. That has a parallel in marketing, since this is exactly what we do in segmentation exercises when we make a persona. The book drives home how even children coming from a small gene pool can think and act so differently from each other. I've got 3 kids, and that's certainly true in my house. But it also left me with an eerie reminder that when you're making campaigns, you need to think about different variables and try to encompass the full range of needs in your market. There are many other good books about the world being on the brink. I recently read The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov, The Kraken Wakes by John Wyndham. And what they all point out is that it only takes changing one of our home planet's parameters for everything to be thrown out of equilibrium and for our whole existence to be threatened. So when I'm feeling smug and secure about life on Earth, I try to keep that in mind. One other best-selling science fiction book I read was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. It'll be out in theaters in 2026, and it's getting a ton of buzz. Despite the fact that I really did like it, instead of reviewing it, you should go and find it in any format you like, and you can be the judge. Continuing in that apocalyptic subgenre, there's a science fiction book from the Golden Age, or classic science fiction age, called Earth Abides, 1959, George Stewart. This book opens with a guy named Isherwood Williams, known as Ish, and he's a geography graduate in his 20s. He's a bit introverted. He's more at home in nature than being around his parents in their suburban California home. Ish goes out camping in the wild hills near his home for a few days to clear his mind, and there he's bitten by a poisonous rattlesnake. He crawls back to his tent and slips into a coma. When the bite's delirious effects wear off, he staggers back to find the streets of the nearby town completely empty. He sees a newspaper in a general store, and it tells the story of a fast-moving viral disease that swept across the whole world. All he knows is that this great disaster, the name he calls it, has suddenly caused the end of civilization. And he missed it. And as far as he knows, he may be the only person alive. But Ish does eventually find a few other survivors. They range widely in age. None are skilled, like Ish, to operate modern machinery or produce essential life supplies like food. Given that they are a small group in a city that once housed millions, there is an inexhaustible supply of food, preserved in cans and jars at grocery stores, and things available at drugstores, car dealerships. So they just break into things and use it when they need it. However, this reliance on scavenging comes to deeply trouble Ish. As time goes on, many parts of how society functions are slipping away. It's like where Galadriel, in the Lord of the Rings movie prologue, says,
"And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend. Legend became myth.
Anytime something breaks, the people burden Ish with their problem. And he fixes many things, but he also starts griping to himself. Quote, "Why am I the only one who has to think, or try to think, 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years into the future?" Unquote. What if there isn't the intellectual desire or ability within that group to rebuild civilization? His frustration boils over when he speaks to them. Quote, "This has got to stop. We mustn't go on living forever just in this happy way, scavenging among all the supplies that the old times left here for us, not creating or doing anything for ourselves." Unquote. And he's right, because that can bring a future where these supplies will all give out someday. Even in marketing theory, we're all grounded on our reading of civilization. And we imagine that civilization will always be here. I have to say, it's a problem for us when we're trying to look at civilization when we are also inside civilization. So to truly understand civilization, we must get ourselves outside of it. I like the book for that reason. Its chief accomplishment is that it does that. And that's a great way for a marketer to recheck all of the assumptions that they're making. I hope you don't think this has been a frivolous listening to some book spotlights. Discussing marketing books is a regular part of this podcast, but I believe that good marketers are readers of books that extend well beyond marketing. David Ogilvy said that, quote, "The best ads come from personal experience. Some of the good ones I've done have really come out of the real experience of my life," unquote. I find that no matter what I'm reading, the activity, it gets my subconscious busy sorting out whatever the pressing marketing problem is that I'm working on. And I hope that reading has the same effect for you. So whether you're listening to this in the dog days of summer or not, I encourage you, get your hands on one of these books or any other reading that feeds your brain and sculpts your mind and hopefully builds a better you. if you commit to reading an average of even 10 books a year over the course of a decade, that's 100. I've steadily worked at reading, and I've found myself consuming enough books that I could, for the podcast, interview authors and put them out here. And to date, this show has covered 100 books. That's the same number that you could get to if you started today. You could get there by 2035 at 10 books a year. But if you go for that number, you'll end up reading a higher number than that. Maybe one a month, or maybe even 2 a month. And you can keep going until the total tops 200, 300, or maybe more books. Here's the thing. Regardless of what schooling you had, when you've read that many books, people will not doubt what you have to say. It will have changed you, and it will be obvious by how you talk that you have acquired deep expertise. I'm going to end with that hopeful summer reading message, and if you consider taking me up on this idea, I'd love you to tell me so. You can do it either on social, on the Funnel Reboot, or on my personal account, Hey Glenn S. My email's listed on the Funnel Reboot website. Call the feedback line, 613-703-7073, or put it in a comment or review wherever you get the podcast, however you'd like. Happy reading.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.